Welcome to the Creek Road Baptist Pulpit. These weekly podcasts feature expository messages delivered to edify the soul. Now let's join Pastor Dave as he presents this week's message.
This evening, chapter 20 of Matthew's Gospel. Without warning, we run into another parable. So we're going to read verses 1 through 16 tonight in Matthew chapter 20. It's kind of a big bite for us, but you can't not do the whole parable. So tonight, chapter 20, Matthew's Gospel, verse 1 through 16. For the kingdom of heaven is like unto a man that is an householder, which went out early in the morning to hire laborers into his vineyard. When he had agreed with the laborers for a penny a day, he sent them into his vineyard. And he went out about the third hour and saw others standing idle in the marketplace. And he said unto them, Go ye also into the vineyard, and whatsoever is right I will give you. And they went their way. Again he went out about the 6th and 9th hour, and did likewise. And about the 11th hour he went out, and found others standing idle, and said unto them, Why stand ye here all the day idle? And they say unto him, Because no man hath hired us. He saith unto them, Go ye also into the vineyard, and whatsoever is right, that shall ye receive. So when even was come, the Lord of the vineyard said unto his steward, Call the laborers, and give them their hire, beginning from the last to the first. And when they came, that were hired about the 11th hour, they received every man a penny. But when the first came, they supposed that they should have received more, and they likewise received every man a penny. And when they had received it, they murmured against the goodman of the house, saying, These last have wrought but 1 hour, and thou hast made them equal unto us, which have borne the burden and heat of the day. But he answered one of them, and said, Friend, I do thee no wrong. Didst not thou agree with me for a penny? Take that thine is, and go thy way. I will give unto this last even as unto thee. Is it not lawful for me to do what I will with mine own? Is thine eye evil, because I am good? So the last shall be first, and the first last. For many be called, but few are chosen. Not only is this a treat because it's in parable form, but it's also a treat because this particular parable is found only in Matthew's Gospel. You won't find it anywhere else in the New Testament. So when you look at your parallel Bibles, and you try to find this particular one, this will be one of those that the parallel authors will set aside because it's unique only to this particular gospel. Jesus begins in verse 1, For the kingdom of heaven is like unto, and so we know we have a similitude. We have this comparison now. We're going to build a picture, and of course our Savior is perfectly wonderful at that. He's a master teacher, and he takes this imagery that is so familiar to his disciples, and it's not that unfamiliar to us either. There are some things here that are a little off to us from our culture to theirs, but it's not that bad. And so we immediately grasp some of the import here of what's being said. And of course, we are comparing this to the kingdom of heaven. So the kingdom of heaven is like unto, and then we have what it's like unto, a man that is an householder. So keep in mind the kingdom of heaven is like this householder. All the way through here, that's our comparison. So we want to make sure we keep that front and center. The householder is the important one. And thus, as we enter into the world of the parable, we meet this man who represents heaven, the householder, and he has property and he has industry under his control. This man is a householder, and we find out that he has a vineyard. He hires laborers. Later on, we find out that there's a steward over this. He has income that's coming in from the fruits of his fields. He needs workers. And it says there in verse 2, is it verse 1? Yeah, verse 1, that he went out early in the morning. Notice there in verse 1. And this early time is probably before 6 a.m., which would be an hour before the day's work commenced. So let's say at 5 a.m. he went to the marketplace. That's an early time. Heaven's looking for laborers who are looking for a full day's wage. And so at 5 a.m., he goes out to the marketplace because the day would start at 6, and they would work the whole day trying to bring in the harvest. The Hebrew day is different than our day. Our day is based on a solar calendar. And so because we're familiar with the solar cycle, we know that day begins after midnight and goes until midnight of the next day. That's how we count our hours of the day. The Jewish calendar was based on a lunar cycle. And the lunar cycle is a great way to keep a calendar because the new moon occurs almost exactly every 28 to 30 days. The new moon happens. And so it's pretty steady. The distance between the phases is regular. The distance between full moons is regular. The distance between new moons is regular. So the ancients kept this calendar a lunar calendar, and so they began their day in the evening because that's when the moon would first appear. And so the day began in the evening, and they would say, like in Genesis, for example, is a perfect example of this. Genesis chapter 1, it was evening and it was morning, day 1. So they would watch the cycle of the moon. During the sunlit hours, they would count those down by sections of 12. And so they would go from 6 in the morning when the sun was first up, or whenever the sun first came up, they would count that the first hour, and then they would count 12 hours, and that was the cycle of the sun during the day, which was a part of a lunar day. The sun did not direct the day. The moon directed the day. The sun was just a part of it, and they counted the working hours from the sun up till sundown in 12 segments, 12 hours. Sometimes, at some points during the year, their hour would match our hour. So our hour is 60 minutes long. Sometimes their hour would be shorter, depending on the phase the sun was in, to ours. Sometimes it would be longer compared to the phase the sun was in to ours. But generally, their hour and ours were just about the same, except for a few exceptions during the year. So when it says here that he went out early, we're talking about 5 or so, because he was going to start the workers around 6, and then we're going to watch these hours transpire in this parable. So he goes out early in the morning, he hires the workers. He hires laborers for his vineyard. So we know that he's there early in the marketplace and he's hiring. He needed workers because the fruit was ready for harvest. When the crop is ready, you have to be ready. You can't wait. Doesn't matter how cold it is, how hot it is. None of that matters. You have to be ready to go out and harvest. And so he goes out and he's going to hire a bunch of men. It says there in verse 2, when he had agreed with the laborers for a penny a day, he sent them into his vineyard. Now, to us, that sounds like a pittance. Who could survive on a penny? But, of course, the value of money has changed so much over the years. While even here in America, we can look back 70 years ago and look at the value of a nickel. And what would a nickel buy 70 years ago? What would a quarter buy 70 years ago? What would a quarter buy 100 years ago or 150 years ago? So the value of money has changed as our money has gotten cheaper, so has the value decreased for the service of that money. In this day, a penny, how we translate this word, a penny, would have been a normal day's wage for a laborer or for a soldier. So this was the standard, and it would have, of course, this penny would have rendered the services to the owner, just like our money renders services to us. They weren't impoverished. They were working hard for a regular living. So they're out. They've agreed with the penny, and this was, like I said, a day's wage for the laborer, for the soldier, and they've agreed. They've struck hands on the deal, and he sends them into the harvest. And so they're out working in the vineyard. They're collecting the fruit of the vineyard. 9 o'clock, it says. And when he went out the third hour, he saw others standing idle in the marketplace. We know these hours because our Savior was on the cross for these hours. He started on the cross at 9 a.m., which is the third hour of the day. And he went till the sixth hour of the day, which is noon. Darkness covered the land until the ninth hour of the day, which is 3 in the afternoon. So we understand the divisions here. They're similar to our hours. So he goes out at the third hour, and he sees men standing in the marketplace, there in verse 3. He went out about the third hour, saw others standing idle in the marketplace. Notice here the progressive mercy. That's how I want to frame this, the progressive mercy of the householder. The first group that he hired at 5 and sent into the vineyard at 6, these were serious early risers. They were ready for a full day's work. He negotiates with that group for their day's pay. And now he comes out at 9 a.m., sees others in the marketplace idle. They're not doing anything. And so this batch are maybe the latecomers. Maybe they had something happen. They didn't get to the market in time, so they could be hired. They're hoping that somebody still comes by and gives them a job. And here this householder is. And it says in verse 4, he said to them, "Go also into the vineyard, and whatsoever is right." Notice that. Whatsoever is right. He doesn't agree with them for a penny. He just says, "Whatsoever is right, I will give you." They went their way. They went to the vineyard. They were going to work for the majority of the day, from 9 o'clock until 6 o'clock, so they're going to work 9 hours. And whatever he gives them, that's what they're going to get. They're willing to work for whatever prorated money the owner decides they will have. They don't know what's been agreed to. And maybe they ask other laborers, but we're not told that. So all they know is they're going to get what the landowner says is right. So they agree to that. They, in a sense, throw themselves on the mercy of the landowner. Verse 5, he went out about the 6th and 9th hour and did likewise. So he goes at noon and he goes at 3. That would be our noon and our 3. Again, he shows mercy to those waiting in the marketplace. And at this time of day, who might expect to find work? But they're there and they're waiting. They're idle. So the people are idle. He's looking. The people need a job. He provides them a job. And he also says to them the same thing, because it mentions there in verse 5, he did likewise. So he said to them, "Whatsoever is right, I will give you." So again, they throw themselves on the mercy of the landowner. You know, he's going to employ me for 6 hours now. He's going to employ me for 3 hours. I'll take whatever I get. I just need to work. And so the idleness of the laborers is in contrast to the mercy of the landowner who's giving them employment. And what's in question the whole time is, how much are these people going to make? I know what the guys at 5 o'clock agreed to. They agreed to a whole penny for the day. But I don't know what's going to happen with these others. So Jesus in this parable begins to build a little suspense here about what these fellas are going to receive as far as their wage. Let's see, verse 6. And about the 11th hour he went out and found others standing idle, and said to them. Now, the 11th hour, he shouldn't be going out. The 11th hour, he's just got an hour left of labor for the day. Why go out to the marketplace, spend the time to go to the marketplace and hire people to work only an hour? It's not going to be worth their time and trouble. It's not going to be worth your time and trouble. But nevertheless, he does. Again, this mercy is being described here. The idleness of this group is so huge. They've been in the marketplace for 11 hours. And no one's hired them. So he comes along and he finds them. And he gives them a job. He says, "Why do you stand here all day?" It's the hour before the close of the day. And again, the mercy of heaven towards those who have waited for employment is seen. He says, why do you stand here all day idle? And what a great question that is. Why would they put themselves up for work and wait for a job that wasn't going to come at 5 o'clock in the afternoon? Now, it doesn't mean that these guys are lazy. It just means that they haven't had opportunity to work. They're still there, and they want to work. They just haven't had anyone hire them. And at 5 o'clock, I think for most of us, we probably would have gone home, because the chance of being hired at 5 o'clock for an hour's worth of work probably wasn't going to manufacture very much money. But somebody does hire them. Their patience in waiting for work pays off. And someone does hire them at 5 o'clock, and he sends them into the vineyard. He says to them, or they say back to him when he asks the question, why you stand here idle all day? They said, no man's hired us. I would just like to suggest that these men represent those of us who wait by faith. They're waiting for the very last moment, and they're not disappointed because they've waited. They've waited all day, 11 hours. They've waited 11 hours of waiting, and then the householder comes and says, go into the vineyard. And you'll notice that he says to them, go into the vineyard, whatsoever is right, that shall ye receive. So again, he said that to the men at 9 o'clock, to the men at 12 o'clock, to the men at 3 o'clock, and then again to these men at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Whatever's right, I'll pay you. Which, if you're hired at 5 o'clock and you've been waiting all day, you just say, okay, point me to the vineyard, right? You know it's not going to be a full day's wage because you've not worked a full day. So just like the 12, the 9, and the 3, whatsoever is right is still our payment. We don't know what it is, but something's going to happen. And by the way, when heaven says whatsoever is right, it's going to be right. Because remember, the householder represents the kingdom of heaven. So the kingdom of heaven is speaking here. Whatsoever is right, I will pay you. Okay, we're going to find out now what's right. That's been the question now since that first group at 9 o'clock was hired. Matthew chapter 20, verse 8. So when the even was come, the Lord of the vineyard said unto the steward, call the laborers and give them their hire, beginning from the first even unto the last. So even here represents 6 o'clock and afterwards. And at 6 o'clock, the sun is starting to set. It's the end of the day, and the men have worked 12 hours. You can't really work them much more than that. The householder sends out his steward. Now, that's an interesting addition to this message here, this steward. So this householder is just not some gentleman farmer who has a little piece of land and he's farming. This is a big agricultural interest. He has a steward over the workers. He has somebody to oversee the work, no doubt. The steward probably oversees the intake of the fruits. This steward probably oversees their storage. He oversees all the money that's made. Think of Joseph in the house of Potiphar. Joseph was a steward. He oversaw all that was going on in Potiphar's house. He managed everything, people, resources, and liquid resources. That's what this man does. And so the householder, even though he's the one that agreed with the people, he said, you give them beginning with the last and then the first. So the steward does what the master says. Of course, the steward is, he's sort of in the background because he doesn't speak, but he's an obedient servant for the householder, and he's going to do exactly what he says. Verse 9, then they came that were hired about the 11th hour, and they received every man a penny. So the last are set first so that all would see. So if the first ones were paid first, then nobody else would see the mercy and the grace of this householder. He puts the last ones in front, and then they all get a penny. So everybody sees the generosity of the householder. The glory of the householder is in view here. Everybody received a penny. If his mercy was seen in their hiring, then the goodness of heaven is seen in the payment. There's no prorating of the penny. You work from 9 o'clock until 6 o'clock. Okay, well, you only get this much of a penny. You work from 12 o'clock to 6 o'clock. You only get half of a penny. You work from 3 o'clock until, okay, you only get so much of the penny. Now, there's none of that. Everybody received a penny. So the goodness of heaven is seen here. And of course, we know that this is the goodness of God. The psalmist writes in Psalm 119:68, "Thou art good and doest good." And certainly that is true in this story. Now in verse 10 it says, "The first came." So the steward had to work through everybody backwards. He worked at the last and then went back to the first. And it says, when the first came, they supposed that they should have received more. And they likewise received every man a penny. Those who worked the 12 hours thought they would get a raise, because those that only worked an hour got the penny. So certainly they would get more than that. The contract stated a penny for a day's work. Something had changed, because these people who worked from 5 o'clock on got a penny. So the contract must have changed. And then they complained in verse 11. They received it, they murmured against the goodman of the house, saying, "These last have wrought but 1 hour. Thou hast made them equal to us, which have borne the burden and heat of the day." Of course, the grumbling against this house owner is against the householder is reminiscent of murmuring that we see all through the Bible. They murmured against the goodman of the house. This is a strong word, and it's one of those onomatopoetic words, that sounds like what it is, what it's describing. They murmured against the goodman of the house. Well, this particular word in Greek sounds like murmuring. And they were grumbling. That's another good way to translate this. They were grumbling against the householder. So we don't always understand the idea of murmur, but grumble we get. I've grumbled. I have been a grumbler in my life, and I have heard grumbling in my life. We know what that's like. It's just like what the people did to Moses when he was leading them. It's a strong word, and it's not very complimentary of these first ones. And they said, "These last have wrought but 1 hour." Now that's true. Their statement here is true. They have only worked an hour. Apparently they were able to keep track of how long everybody worked, which makes me wonder what they were doing while they were working. I thought they were working, but apparently they had time to figure out who came in when. So these last have worked only an hour. And of course, that's the truth. Now notice what the grumblers do here. They point then to the goodman, to the householder. "You have made them equal to us. This is false. The householder did no such thing. His pledge was to pay the others whatever was right. It had nothing to do with disrespecting the laborers." They assign ill motives to the householder. We do the same with God, don't we? We don't get what we think we need to get. We throw a fit about it. We murmur, we grumble, we complain. Every man receives a penny. I need to receive more than a penny because I worked longer. I'm going to tell you something now. It's hot in Israel. It's a beautiful place. It is absolutely gorgeous. Tim was talking about the weather in Hawaii. The weather in Israel in the summertime, there is no humidity. There is a breeze that starts at 5 o'clock every single day. On the clock, 5 o'clock, you get a breeze. It comes in from the sea, and it is marvelous. There is not a cloud in the sky. The sky is this azure blue. It is just breathtaking. But I'm going to tell you, friends, the sun has nothing to hide behind. And if you're out and you're working outside in that sunshine, it does not take long for you to dehydrate, because the lack of humidity and the bright sunshine and the warm temperatures will dry you out in a moment. So when these people say, "We've worked all day," I get it. I've been there. And I understand this is not an easy job. They've been outside for 12 hours. And, after 12 hours in that heat, in that sunshine, I can understand a little bit why they grumbled. But they have no right to assign ill motives to the householder like they have. "You've made them equal to us." Nope. "Which have borne the burden and heat of the day." Of course, this is why they're being paid. You got to pay these men for what they've done. This is true. They've borne the burden and heat of the day, and it's hot over there. This is the job of the farmhand, to bear the hardship of physical labor while gathering a large crop. And so that's the true statement. But the falsehood in what they have to say is right there in the middle. You have made them equal to us. Not so. Not so. The householder said he would do whatever was right. So the householder answers this complaint. There in verse 13. He says to one of them, "Friend, I do thee no wrong." Now notice that it says he said to one of them. So it must have been a bunch of them that were complaining. They had gotten together. They had a gaggle of them that were griping about what the householder had done. "I do thee no wrong. Did you not agree with me for a penny?" Ooh. It's horrible when you pull up the facts in an argument, isn't it? His defense is in the contract they agreed to. They agreed to a penny. He paid them a penny. Verse 4, "Take that is thine and go thy way." So here's the plan of action. You take what is yours and you just go on about your day because we've ended our agreement. You said you'd work all day for a penny. I paid you a penny. It's time for you to go home and kiss your wife and your babies. Go home. And then you notice that last statement there in 14. "I will give unto this last even as unto thee." Here we have the grace of the householder. We didn't know what was going to happen. We didn't know what whatsoever was right will I give you meant, but now we do. It meant a full penny. The householder is gracious. He's wonderful. "I will give unto this last even as unto thee." And then notice verse 15. "Is it not lawful for me to do what I want with mine own?" Here we see the sovereignty of heaven. Heaven will do as heaven pleases. Heaven agreed with these men for a penny. He will pay them a penny, and he will pay everybody else that works for him a penny because that's how good he is. That's how gracious he is. And by the way, it's all his anyhow. So he can do with it as he pleases. The sovereignty of God is in full view here in verse 15. "Is it not lawful for me?" Yes, it is lawful for you because it's your penny. You hired me. This is your property. This is your fruit. This is all yours. The steward is yours. Everything is yours. You pay me a penny? That's great. You pay that man a penny? That's great because you're in control of what belongs to you. And then the question, is your eye evil because I'm good? Oh, my goodness. Does that strike at the heart of the corruption inside of men? Yes, this is envy. He asks the question about envy. Are you envious? Are you envious of me, he says. They're not envious of the other guys because the other guys had nothing to do with him getting a penny. They're envious of the householder because he was that good to everybody. Is thine eye evil because I am good? The answer to that question is yes. Their eye is evil because he's good. They're confused and they're greedy. They see something, they want more. And then we have the conclusion. And all of a sudden, the conclusion, we say, wait a minute, didn't we just have that verse? Didn't we just read that? There in verse 30 of chapter 19, "Many that are first shall be last, and the last shall be first." We studied that last time. Here it is again. "So the last shall be first, and the first last. For many be called, but few chosen." This is the reason for the parable. Jesus wants to explain what he was teaching up here in verse 30. Verse 28, Jesus said unto them, "Verily I say unto you, ye which have followed me in the regeneration, when the Son of Man shall sit in the throne of his glory, ye also shall sit upon 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. And every one that hath forsaken houses, or brethren, or sister, or father, or mother, or wife, or children, or lands for my sake, shall receive 100-fold, and shall inherit everlasting life. But many that are first shall be last, and the last shall be first." So, Jesus instructing his disciples about Peter's question, Peter asked him, "Well, what are we going to get?" And remember, we talked about that last time. Jesus said, "Well, the 12 are going to get this. All that believe are going to get this. But let's not confuse things. All of this is in the control of heaven. The last are going to be first. Our way and God's way are not the same, never have been, never will be. He brings the last in first and allows the first to be last. That way, all of us stand humble before the very presence of the Father. This is a parable about the kingdom of heaven. A man who is an householder went out early in the morning to hire laborers into his vineyard.
Jesus will meet you.
Thanks for listening to this week's message. Please join us again next time for another installment of the Creek Road Baptist Pulpit.